Hi there, welcome back to the channel. So, I got a new 2x12, Marshall 2x12 1936 cabinet, and when I went to go get the cabinet, I was able to compare this to a Marshall 4x10. The 4x10 was loaded with Celestion GT65s, these are 10-inch speakers, and there's 4 of them. The 2x12 had GT75 and a Eminence red coat in it. They're 12-inch speakers. The two cabinets sounded markedly different. So, if you're out there searching, you've done your search and you've gone to the gear page and you've gone to Harmony Central, or if you've gone to the Fender sites or the Gibson sites, and you're probably the Gibson sites if you're looking at Marshalls, and if you're wondering what the difference between the two is, I believe I wish I had a demonstration of it, and I wish I'd had some sound audio documentation for you to listen to. But I'll just briefly tell you what my observation was and what my recommendation would be if you're looking for advice or just what other people have heard and experienced. The 2x12, it was more apropos for what I was looking for. Step one, my head is just big enough. It's like a full-size head, even though it's only an 18 watt. And so it's not as big as like a 100-watt head or maybe even a 50-watt head, but it was bigger than the 4x10. So you got the effect of like having an amp head on top of a cabinet that's not big enough for it. And that's just aesthetically displeasing to me. So you get the effect of it like hanging over the edge like this. And that can look okay, especially if you're, in a studio and there's reasons for it. But it wasn't my favorite look, and it's just kind of clumsy looking, and the head will end up getting knocked over. Whereas this one had, the rails built in, these cup rails, where you can just put the amp head right on top, and it actually is kind of like made for it, like perfectly made for it. So that was one of the first things I noticed. I was like, well, this works better as a rig, and I can transfer it right to this one, and it just makes sense together. And these two rigs work great together because they're both 12-inch speakers, and I essentially have a full stack now. I've got 6 speakers as opposed to just 4 or just 2. And then when I want to roll this away to do a small show, I've got the 2x12, and when I want to stay here or play a bigger show, I've got the 4x12 or the 2 of them together. The 4x10 was much smaller. It looked more like the combo. It was like a little taller than the combo, but it was not very wide. The speakers are, they're 10-inch speakers, they're smaller speakers. The difference in tone and sound was thus. The 2x12, when I crank it all the way up, turning the amp all the way up, and I'm getting a guitar with humbuckers out, like a Les Paul, a Flying V, maybe a Super Strat with a humbucker in it. The typical kind of combination that you would have with a Marshall stack. Alright? The 4x10 gives a more refined presentation. For starters, it has more of a beaming quality, and that you kind of get right in front of it, and that's where the sound is. It sort of beams at you in a very directional way, meaning that the sound is very controllable. I like that beaming, and some people don't like it because you have to be in the perfect spot to really get the most out of it. But as far as like not making it too loud on stage, if you have an amp that beams like that and is very directional, you can sort of shift it around so that it doesn't blast the crowd, or doesn't blast the sound man, or doesn't blast the drummer, or doesn't blast the bass player, the singer, or whoever it is that is getting blasted. That's a good thing. The other thing is that it was very focused, and it had more of a hi-fi sound. So if you were looking to play something that sounded a little more refined, if you weren't the kind of guy that cranks way up, like I'm looking to get as much growl as possible. I don't use pedals, especially I don't use any kind of distortion pedal. So I've got my amp turned all the way up. It's only 18 watts, so we've got full power running, all the way full on. And I want some like nasty growl. I want some nasty. The 4x10 would do that, especially if you pushed it really hard and maybe with a little more wattage. But with this rig, the 4x10 was a little more polite. And so if that's what you were going for, if you were going for more of a refined tone, you don't want the like the nastiest punk rock tone or like big metal tone or big nasty tone. If you wanted something more refined, more controllable, more beam-like, and just more refined and a little more polite, the 4x10. And I can picture how a certain kind of player would heavily prefer the 4x10, and another player that maybe is more rock and roll and noise driven will go with the 2x12. What I noticed with the 2x12 is that it's tonally not as accurate and complete as the 4x10. The 4x10 probably had more, it had the right amount of everything. A little bit of more rounded bass, a little more presence in the mid-range, and a little more just refinement. The 2x12, on the other hand, gave you like upfront, in-your-face power on tap. It gave you like insta rock and roll, like the AC/DC kind of dry, distorted SG into a cranked JMP, that type of tone. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. I want a nasty, dirty, kind of like raw rock sound. I can always roll off. I can always warm up, those kinds of things, but I want it on tap. So I went with the 2x12. I would say that if you're looking for a more refined sound, if you play jazz, if you play blues, if you play clean, 4x10. If you play nasty and you want something more forward, more dynamic, more up in your face, and more like chainsaw-ish, I guess is a good way to, a metaphor that you could use, or a simile, like a chainsaw, that would be the 2x12. The 2x12 has crisper edges. The 4x10 was a little more rounded off. So one was like barky and in your face, and one was a little more, like I said, refined. So that, I would say, would be the main difference. If you're looking for something a little more hi-fi, a little more refined, I would go 4x10. And if you need something really small, the 4x10 was significantly smaller. Not so much so that it made a difference for me, but I could see that if every inch counts, 4x10 for size, 2x12 for more adaptability. Mainly because 12-inch speakers are much more plentiful, and there's a lot more types of speakers and better speakers out there. There's not tons of great 10-inch speakers. I would say that the Marshalls are one of them. Those GT65s are good ones, but they're not always great speakers out there in the 10-inch variety. So that's limiting. But I would say if it comes down to size and just style. If you're looking for more refined, 4x10. If you want to get nasty, 2x12. And both are a great option for a smaller rig. And ultimately, I'd like to have both. See you next time. Thank you.